we express with the lifting of our hands, with our voices. All right, so I don't know what you came to church today for. Some people came for healing. Some people came for deliverance. You got bills that need to be paid. You got relatives in the hospital. But we believe on today that it's going to work for you. How many believe that today? I know y'all can do better than that. But we got to get we'll be a little louder. How many know that it's going to work? All right. All these moving, you can stay here. You don't have to do all that moving. But we say it's going to turn. We just going to turn, all right? Like it. Oh, like this. I like this. I like this. Oh, then it's gonna turn. It's gonna turn. It's gonna turn. Oh, come on, everybody. How we gonna do it? Then it's gonna turn. It's gonna turn. And you gotta turn. Oh, one more time. Oh, then it's gonna turn. It's gonna turn. Then it's gonna turn. It's gonna turn. Then it's gonna turn. It's gonna turn.
to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and tell him God's message. Release my people so they can worship me. If you refuse to release them, I'm warning you, I'll hit the whole country with frogs. The Nile will swarm with frogs. They'll come up into your houses, into your bedrooms, and into your beds, into your servants' quarters, among the people, into your ovens." Somebody say the devil is alive. "And pots and pans. They'll be all over you, all over everyone. Frogs everywhere, on and in everything." God said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, wave your staff over the rivers and canals and ponds. Bring up frogs on the land of Egypt." Aaron stretched out his staff over the waters of Egypt, and a mob of frogs came up and covered the country. But again, the magicians did the same thing using their incantations. They also produced frogs in Egypt. Pharaoh called in Moses and Aaron and said, "Pray to God to rid us of these frogs. I'll release the people so that they can make their sacrifices and worship God." Moses said to Pharaoh, "Certainly, set the time. When do you want the frogs out of here? Away from your servants and people and out of your houses. You'll be rid of the frogs except for those in the Nile." And I just want to read the first statement in verse 10. This is Pharaoh's response after Moses said, "When do you want me to get rid of the frogs?" Pharaoh's response in the first statement in verse 10 is this: "Make it tomorrow." I want to talk this morning from this subject. Give me one more night with these frogs. You may be seated in the Lord's presence. That's what I want to talk about. Give me one more night with these frogs. Now, I'm already saying in my own heart, Brother Rand, if I've been dealing with frogs and you ask me when I want the frogs gone, my response is going to be, get rid of all the frogs, not right now. Get rid of all the frogs right now. I don't even know if that's English, but it sounds good theologically. Get rid of all the frogs right now. But Pharaoh's response was, let's get rid of them tomorrow. For some reason or another, he wanted one more night with those frogs. A careful reading of the entire book of Exodus will reveal that Exodus has 5 main characters. The first main character in the book of Exodus is God. The voice of God, the hand of God, the will of God is found throughout the book of Exodus. God is the first main character. The second main character is a group of people. It is Israel. They were God's selected people. They were selected because God was going to use them to give birth to the Messiah. So the first main character is who? God. Second main character is a group. They were called Israel. Then there's the third main character found in the book of Exodus, and it is Egypt. The Egyptians were the people who were oppressing God's people. And the reason that God shows up to deliver them is because they were being oppressed by the Egyptians. So the first main character in Exodus is God. The second main character is Israel. The third main character is Egypt. Let me give you the fourth main character. It is Moses. Now, we learned about Moses a couple of weeks ago. It is Moses who was delivered by his parents, and God used Moses to deliver God's people. It's that Moses who was able to take his staff by the time you get to chapters 13 and 14 and stretch that staff out in front of the waters of the Red Sea, and the waters parted wide open. God's people marched through the seabed, and then after they made it out safely, Pharaoh's army pursued behind them, and the same waters that had been a place of salvation for Israel became a watery grave for the Egyptians. So the first main character is God. Second main character is Israel. Third main character is Egypt. Fourth main character is Moses. Then there's a fifth main character in the book of Exodus, and his name is Aaron. We read about him just a few verses ago. Aaron is the brother of Moses. And you may recall that Moses, when God told him to go to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let his people go, Moses said, God, I want to go, but I don't speak well. And God got angry, the Bible says in chapter 4. God says, I'm the one who put your tongue in your mouth. I know how well or how not so well you can speak. But because you have raised this concern, take your brother Aaron with you. And we see Aaron participating here in chapter 8. Now, when you take all of those characteristics together, the characteristics of God, Israel, Egypt, Moses, and Aaron, they reveal several things for us about the character of God and how God's character interacts with us. Someone has said that it is not the size of the dog in the fight as much as it is the size of the fight in the dog. And somebody in this room today, you may feel just like the people of Israel. In one way or another in your life, you feel pressed from every side. Okay, can we stop having church for just a moment and have a conversation? Is there anybody who's willing to be honest that somewhere in your personal life you have awakened every morning for the last 7 days wondering whether or not you and God were playing on the same team? Okay, deep saints show up on whatever Sunday this is. But there's some of us in here who know in our finances, in our family, in our physical health, sometimes you are wondering whether or not you and God are on the same page. One of my dearest friends in the world is Mr. Louis Calavoto. I love Louis Calavoto as if he and I were born from the same mother and father. If Louis were in here today, you'd probably be able to tell we were not born from the same mother and the same father. I love Louis dearly. Sometime last year, Louis reached out to a group of his friends and he informed us that he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. A procedure was scheduled for them to perform surgery as a measure to treat his pancreatic cancer. When they opened him up on the day of surgery, they closed him back up. After they revived him, he wanted to know how well the surgery had gone, only to have the surgeon tell him that when we opened you up to work on your pancreas, we saw that the cancer had spread from your pancreas to your liver, and there is nothing we can do for you. They sent him home that day with only months to live. They decided to put him on chemotherapy simply to retard the advancement of the aggressive cancer. And then they decided that the procedure that they wanted to do initially, that maybe they would be able to do it. They scheduled him for a CT scan, Sister Charlotte, And when they performed the CT scan to see how well the chemotherapy was working, they discovered that the cancer that used to be on his liver was not on his liver anymore. And then they said that the procedure we wanted to do initially that caused us to sew you back up, we are now able to do it. They opened him back up again, worked on his pancreas, and when he came out of surgery, the doctor said instead of having months, you have 5 to 10 more years. What are you telling me, Pastor Bo? Don't tell me what God cannot do. And sometimes you feel like Israel, sometimes you feel like Louis Calavola, that maybe you are wondering if you and God are on the same page. That causes me to draw 2 conclusions. Let me give you the first one. The one who fights for you is greater than those who fight against you. The one who fights for you is greater than those who fight against you. That's not all. There's a second conclusion I want to draw, and it is this. The one who fights with you is greater than those who fight against you. The reason God shows up to fight on Israel's behalf is because in Exodus chapter 2, Israel cried out to God. Can I ask you a question? Why would God fight for you if you are not willing to fight with him? Okay, let me put it in your lap. Why would God give you a job and you're too lazy to fill out the application? You don't have to like me. Why would God work a miracle in the supernatural and you won't use common sense in the natural? And God's word to somebody in here is there are some supernatural things that God is waiting to do, but there are some natural things that God needs you to do. A preacher was on his way home after a very long day of preaching and serving. He happened to walk into a darker part of his city down a back alley, and out of the darkness there emerged a man who came upon him so quickly until he did not see him coming. The man said to the preacher, "Do you have a light?" The preacher reached in his pocket, pulled out a cigarette lighter. Some of y'all are wondering why the preacher had a cigarette lighter. The preacher didn't ask you why you got one. Y'all so deep, y'all come to church on Sunday. He reaches into his pocket, he pulls out a cigarette lighter, he lights the man's cigarette, and the man walks away. The following morning, the preacher is reading the morning newspaper, and the headline on the front page spoke of a murder that occurred the night before. The suspect had been apprehended and his mugshot was on the front page. The preacher looked at the mugshot and recognized that the same man who committed a robbery and murder the night before was the same man that he had given a light the evening before. The preacher was disturbed. He said, "I must go and find out how this robbery and murder occurred." Because according to the time framing of the article, the man who committed the robbery and murder murdered a man after he had received the light from the preacher. The preacher goes down to the jail. They let him in to speak to the apprehended suspect. And the preacher said, "Do you remember me?" He said, "Oh yes, I remember you." He said, "Did you murder someone last night?" He said, "Yes, I robbed and murdered someone last night." "Did you rob and murder them after you came in contact with me?" He said, "I did." He said, "Well, my question is, why did you rob them and didn't rob me. To which the fellow responded, oh, I was going to rob you. And if the robbery didn't go well, I was going to kill you. He said, but when you flicked your lighter, I saw those two big men standing behind your shoulders. And I decided you were not the one for me to rob. What are you getting at, Pastor Thor? There is a God who is with you and a God who's fighting for you. Can I ask you something? Have you been showing up to your fights by yourself? When the reality is you ought to have two men standing behind either shoulder, God's grace and God's mercy, flanking you to take you wherever He wants you to be. The one who fights for you is greater than those who fight against you. The one who fights with you is greater than those who fight against you. How does God work His good will to bring us out of whatever we are in? I'm glad you asked. Let me give you two responses to how God works out His good will to bring us out of whatever we find ourselves in. There are two responses. The first way that God brings us out is this way. He brings us out for our good, ultimately. He brings us out for our good, ultimately. Don't raise your hands. You can just raise your eyes. Hold your head real straight. Don't nobody need to see your head fall. Have you ever been broke? I mean, oh, I got some witnesses in here that know about broke. See, some of us now, we go to the gas station, we don't even know how much it costs per gallon. We just grab the handle, squeeze, and keep right on going. But some of us remember when. Okay, let me make it real personal. Some of you are familiar with Fruit Loops. I'm familiar with Fruit Rings. Some of you are familiar with Captain Crunch. I'm familiar with Crisp Crunch. You don't know what that is? You don't know what that is? It's because you've been buying brand name stuff. I know what it's like to get whatever brand the store was selling that day. Some of y'all are familiar with Gustafson Farm, Mama, Papa, Gus, T.G. Lee. I know what it's like to pour a bowl of cereal, pour evaporated milk on the cereal, turn on the faucet, stick the bowl of cereal under the faucet to mix water with the evaporated milk to eat the Crisp Crunch. What am I getting at? I ain't always been where I am right now. In God's word to somebody in here, you might be broke, busted, and disgusted, sick, don't know where deliverance is coming from. God sent me by here to tell you He is working things out for your good, ultimately. That means it may not all change overnight. May not all change instantly. But if I can reach past my Mahalia Jackson and reach to my Sam Cooke, I was born by the river in a little tent. Just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming. But I know, see, I ain't got no old school saints in here. Y'all need some Jay-Z and some August to help y'all catch up. But I can reach back to Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke said it's been a long time coming. But I know that a change is gonna come. And God's word to somebody in here today is God is working behind the scenes, working out his good will for your good ultimately. But that's not all. Not only is he working things out for your good ultimately, but he is working things out for his glory always. Now you gotta let that sink in. It will work out for your good ultimately. We don't know how long ultimately is going to take. But everything God does, he works out for his glory. Now you gotta learn how to deal with that. Let me just get that to you for free. Because some of us been in church for a long time and we've been misled in church. Because church folks will try to tell you if you give right, live right, pray right, praise right, trouble won't show up at your address. Tell that to Jesus. He lived right, he gave right, he praised right, he prayed right, and still ended up on a cross. But his testimony is for every midweek crucifixion, there's a Sunday morning resurrection. And if you can make it through the crucifixion, you can make it to the resurrection. God ultimately works out all things for his glory. If you are familiar with the book of Exodus, you will remember that when God sends Moses to Pharaoh to tell Pharaoh to let the people go, the Bible says that God allowed Pharaoh's heart to get hard. Did you hear what I said? God allowed Pharaoh's heart to get hard. So that instead of releasing God's people, he doubled down on keeping God's people in captivity. God says, that ain't a problem. I know that's bad grammar, but it sounds good theologically. That ain't a problem. Every time Pharaoh's heart gets hard, I will release a new plague on his people to begin the process of breaking him. The first plague was to take the waters of the Nile and all of their water supply channels and turn them into blood, which made the water no longer potable or drinkable. The second plague that God sent upon them is found in Exodus chapter 8. And God says, I'm going to cover the entire land with frogs. You saw it in verse 1 through verse 6. God, everywhere there was something, there was a frog. Frogs in the bed, frogs in the kitchen. Some of y'all don't even allow your dog or cat in the kitchen and they sleep in your bed. Frogs everywhere. Frogs in the oven. Frogs in the pots and pans. Here were frogs, there were frogs, everywhere a frog. God was trying to break Pharaoh, but instead of Pharaoh being broken, his heart became hard. I want to say some things to you about rebellion. In verse 1 through verse 6, God sends the frogs. Watch what Pharaoh does in response in verse 7. Exodus chapter 8 and verse 7. Now, verse 1 through verse 6, God sends frogs everywhere. Watch verse 7. But again, the magicians did the same thing using their incantations. They also produced frogs in Egypt. Let me tell you what that means. Moses brought frogs. Pharaoh says, I got some sorcerers around here. They can bring some frogs too. And Pharaoh's sorcerers brought frogs. Funny thing about that, when you get to verse 8, Pharaoh called in Moses and Aaron and said, pray to God to get rid of these frogs. I'll release the people so that they can make their sacrifices and worship God. Hey, here's the rebellion. The Pharaoh of Egypt knew how to make frogs, he just didn't know how to make them go away. Be careful what you make. Somebody in this room, you made a bill because your cousin made a bill. They got a new car, you thought you needed a new car. Only if you recognize that new cars come with new payments. And you don't know how your cousin making their payments. And now you're struggling to get rid of something that you made because you saw somebody else make it. You know what that leads me to say about rebellion? Rebellion makes you stupid. Now, I couldn't find no other suitable word for you being so mean and so rebellious until you make frogs just to prove to the person who made your first frogs that you can make frogs too. You know what that is? That's stupid. Rebellion makes you stupid. Anybody willing to be honest that you've done some stupid stuff in your stages of rebellion? Keyed somebody's car. You know they calling the police. You know it's cameras everywhere. You know you got to pay for what you just messed up. Burning up somebody's clothes. Have you watched the people's car? They're going to make you pay for that. Just Marilyn Million is going to make you pay for them clothes. Rebellion makes you stupid. Hey, that's not all. Not only does rebellion make you stupid, but rebellion makes you stubborn. 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 Gotta have your own way. Gotta do it your way. Can't nobody tell you nothing. Take my horse. Okay. Just want to make sure we don't say that. Can't nobody tell me. Can't nobody tell you nothing. You stubborn. Stubborn. Look at verse 9 through verse 11 and how stubborn they are. Moses said to Pharaoh, certainly, set the time. When do you want the frogs out of here? Away from your servants and people and out of your houses. You'll be rid of frogs except for the frogs in the Nile. And hell, Pharaoh, make it tomorrow. That's stubborn right there. Moses said, tomorrow it is. So you'll realize that there is no God like our God. The frogs will be gone, you and your houses and your servants and your people free of frogs. The only frogs left will be the ones in the Nile. Why? After you've been dealing with frogs all this time, and you were given the opportunity to get rid of the frogs, why would you ask for one more night with the frogs? Let me warn you about something. Can y'all handle this? Everybody you think is trying to help you is not trying to help you. Whatever you ask for, make sure you and God are asking for the same thing. I've been around a lot. But at this stage, not that I'm all that old, but I've seen a lot of things. And one of the things I've seen within organizations is that sometimes you ask and ask and ask to get permission to do something, and then people give you permission, they just don't give you support. Your parents want you in school full time, but you want to be in school full time and you want to work on a job. And you say, can I get a job? 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 And finally, they say, yes, you can have a job. But you ain't gonna have a ride. Because just because you have permission does not mean you have support. And you got to watch some of the people in some of our folks been around here a while dealing with people. Especially in corporate situations, you know how people work. That sometimes people will give you permission to do something secretly hoping that you will fail. Even when what you are offering to do for them will make them look good. Because that's how rebellion works. Rebellion makes you stupid, but then it makes you stubborn. Bible scholars have given at least 2 reasons that maybe Pharaoh wanted another night with the frogs. Here's the first one. Maybe he hoped it couldn't be done. Remember, Pharaoh's feelings are already hurt that his magicians could make frogs, they just couldn't make the frogs go away. So maybe he was secretly hoping that I'm going to tell Moses to do it tomorrow just in case he's not going to be able to do it. And some people in your life, under the disguise of helping you, are hoping that you fail at the same time. That's why you got to walk with God everywhere that you go. You got to walk with God in everything that you do. So secretly, maybe he hoped it couldn't be done. Hey, here's the second reason Bible scholars give. Maybe he hoped it wouldn't be done. You know, people will, you ain't gonna like this. You ain't gonna like this. You're not gonna like this. Everybody you ask for money, when they give it to you, some of them hoping you won't be able to pay it back. So they can hold it over you to 2025. Some of y'all, somebody did something for you, you ain't even got it no more. Whatever they gave you. And the only reason they did it is so somewhere in their heart, you know what? They wouldn't have had that house if it wasn't for that $50 I loaned them in 67. Sometimes they hope you can't do it. Sometimes they hope you won't be able to do it. Why? Rebellion makes you stubborn. Hey, rebellion makes you stupid. Rebellion makes you stubborn. Here's the last one, and I'm out. Rebellion makes people suffer. Look at verse 12 through verse 15. This is heartbreaking here. Because sometimes trouble is easy to get into, but it's hard to get out of. You know what I done figured out? Not about y'all, about some of y'all cousins. Not none of y'all in here, some of y'all cousins. Y'all got some cousins in Wyoming that have this problem. We only tell the pretty parts of our testimony. We testify about what the Lord brought us out of. We don't even tell people how we got in it in the first place. Hey, we'll do this, Mr. Lawson. We will testify about how the Lord healed our bodies. We won't tell him about the 10 years we refused to exercise. We won't tell him about the water we didn't drink, the sleep we didn't get, the pies, fat back we ate, the grease we poured in our greens. The fact that we came up with a name for bacon grease called red eye gravy. It's grease. And all we want to talk about is he healed my body, told me to run on. And what makes that so jacked up is our young people are not given a roadmap on how to keep from getting sick in the first place. I ain't done, but all the people said, can't say amen, say ouch, either one word. Look at the suffering beginning in verse 12. Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, and Moses prayed to God about the frogs he had brought on Pharaoh. God responded to Moses' prayer. The frogs died off, houses, courtyards, fields, all free of frogs. But watch this. They piled the frogs in heaps. The country reeked of dead frogs. Which means they had to deal with the frogs while they lived. Then they had to deal with the stench and infestation of the frogs after they died. Because the frogs didn't disappear. They dropped dead right where they were. And for the next 6 weeks, they thought they had gotten rid of every frog corpse. Only to find there was about 7 of them stinking somewhere in a wall. And you had to break into it to find where the stinking frog was. And even in all of that, Pharaoh's heart still turned hard. And he went back on what he had promised to do. 5 main characters in the book of Exodus. 1 is divine, the other 4 are human. God is the divine character. The human characters are Israel, Egypt, Moses, and Aaron. Do you see yourself in any of them? Somebody in this room, you see yourself like Egypt. You say, Pastor, I'm trying to do the best the best I can with what I have, and I'm trusting God every day. That's Israel. There are others, you see yourself just like Moses. You say, Pastor, I believe there is a calling on my life, and God wants to use me to make a difference in someone else's life. So some you may see yourself as Israel, others you see yourself as Moses. Someone else in this room, you see yourself like Aaron. And you say, Pastor, I don't need to be the CEO, just give me a spot somewhere on the board. I got good news for you. God says you don't have to be a star. Some of y'all folks don't know. They say, Pastor, I've got a Motown spirit in here this morning. Songwriter said you don't have to be a star, baby, to be in my show. And somebody in this room, you say, Pastor, I don't see myself like a Moses. I see myself like an Aaron. I don't have to be the president. Just bring me in somewhere on the board. Pastor, that's 3. Israel, Moses, and Aaron. You said there are 4. Somebody in here, you see yourself like Egypt. Rebellious. And if you be honest, your rebellion has caused you to make some stupid decisions. Your rebellion has caused you to be really stubborn. And your rebellion has caused you to suffer. Here's great news. You can end all of your rebellion today. You can get out of the path of making stupid, stubborn, suffering decisions and allow God to bring you some deliverance starting